My name is Jean Burke. I'm a professor of chemistry here at Cedar Crest. And thank you for joining us for this panel discussion on pipeline education that's being co-sponsored by the Lehigh Valley American Chemical Society section and the Northampton County League of Women Voters. As chair of the Lehigh Valley ACS, I wanted to let you know that we were founded in 1984, and we serve the Lehigh Valley, including regions of Northeast Pennsylvania, Southern New York, and Northwest New Jersey. As a local section, our goals are to promote awareness of chemistry through involvement in the community and outreach programs. So we were thrilled to be able to partner with the League of Women Voters to educate the community on pipelines. So we work with industry and academia to educate the public about the benefits of chemists as a profession and as a science. And so with that, I'd like to invite up Julianne Skinner to act as the moderator for tonight's forum.
Okay. In your program, the guest speakers are in order of appearance. And question and answer. Our first presenter is Dr. Roberta Winters. Okay. Dr. Winters has been with the League of Women Voters for several years. She has served as Vice President for Issues and Action, and as a matter of fact, she wrote this grant. So, Dr. Winters, if you would like to start your presentation, thank you.
Some notes. The last time I was in this auditorium was for my daughter's dance, because she went to Cedar Crest. She was a dance student here, and she also was on stage here in Nonsuch. So I have very fond memories of Cedar Crest, and pipelines will be equally inviting for you, I hope. Do I need to put this on or off? Is the battery dead? There, here we go. Okay. For most of us, pipelines are out of sight and out of mind. However, in today's world, knowledge is power, so we're going to begin to learn about those tonight, so we hopefully can go away knowing a lot more and being better protected. Pennsylvania is covered with pipelines. If you look at this map, you will see blue and red lines and some orange blobs. The blue lines represent the natural gas lines growing throughout the Commonwealth. Is that correct, Karen? The blue and the red are the liquid lines, and those orange blobs are the storage facilities. We have over 60 storage facilities in Pennsylvania for natural gas that are under 25 counties. We also, in Lehigh Valley, have considerable number of pipelines. Some of them are contiguous and run into other states, and other ones lie only within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. To look at natural gas pipelines, you really have to understand they're part of a larger system. And, of course, that starts at the natural gas wells, which are becoming more prevalent throughout the Commonwealth. Here is a well pad, as you might see them once they're being drilled. Once they go into production, a lot of these trailers and the infrastructure above the pads disappear. With the pads come many lines. There are production lines, and there are also lines that carry the water needed for fracking into and out of the wells. And so some of these lines are unregulated and are not under the jurisdiction of anyone. And a lot of people in the Commonwealth are concerned what would happen to these. For example, if a snowplow or all-terrain vehicle went into some of these water lines that may be carrying water from one well pad to another for recycling purposes. From the well pads, they usually go into gathering lines. These are gathering lines that run from the well pads into the transmission lines. These can vary from 18 to 30 inches in diameter and operate as pressures as high as the interstate transmission lines. And currently, because they're in rural areas for the most part, where there are very few people along the line, they are outside the jurisdiction of the federal and state regulators. We do have some regulations now that does allow the PUC, and we have someone from the PUC here this evening who will be able to tell you who is operating those lines and how many miles of them there are and what materials they're constructed under. You can look at Bradford County as an example. These are the gathering lines in Bradford County. We have thousands of miles of these in the rural areas that run from the well pads into the main transmission lines, which you can see in green. So we're concerned because of the rural area gathering lines, and this is, as Karen Gentili said to me earlier, this is call month. And you need to call 811 before you dig. So when you dig, you don't hit a natural gas line because that can cause a significant incident. But because of the rural gathering lines in Pennsylvania, they are not covered by the 811 system. So if you live in Susquehanna County, where Julianne Skinner lives, you would not know where the pipelines were. So if you dig, you are putting yourself at risk. And also, you can see a gentleman in the corner with his hand to his nose like this. The reason for that is most of us identify natural gas because it smells. They add an odor to it. But in many of these lines in the rural areas and from the well pads, you do not smell the characteristic natural gas odor smell. So this is another concern that we have, that these gas lines are not odorized. So if there's a leak, you will only know it because it might hiss, or you might see bubbles in liquids, or you might, get a sense that something's wrong, but you won't be able to smell the characteristic odor. You can also look at these storage facilities because demand for natural gas varies seasonally. We need to be able to store it, so when we have a cold winter like we did this time of year, the natural gas is available for customers. So here you can see some of the storage facilities. There's some in underground salt mines. They can be held in large pipelines and tanks, and they can also be held above ground. Now, as these pipelines flow, there are very large control centers that are computerized, sort of like one of those NASA control centers that you see, where they can monitor the flow of natural gas from place to place. They're able, in many cases, to detect leaks and even remotely shut down valves to prevent major problems. We wish they would operate perhaps more effectively and more consistently than they have shown in the past. As a part of the natural gas operations, there are many processing facilities, and maybe some of you have read recently about the processing facilities that are being moved into places like Philadelphia, and also into regions they sometimes call these crackers, where they can separate the wet gas, basically, which is being produced in the western part of the state, into byproducts that can be used for further production, such as in plastics. Along the pipelines, to maintain the flow of the lines in a consistent manner, are compressor stations. The compressor stations regulate the pressure and also at the same time act to clean some of the fuel, because along the way it picks up water and other pollutants. You can see they are large, they operate 24/7. People are concerned, and when you see that little policeman up there, that means there's a little concern about these, because they tend to be very noisy. They operate 24/7. They can be a source of volatile organic substances and other materials that we have concerns about in terms of the environment. They also have condensate tanks where they take out other materials that are stored and removed from the site. These are the interstate transmission lines that are large and flow from one state to another. Some go all the way from Texas to Maine. These are huge and sometimes operate in parallel and are tied together across the nation. Right now in Pennsylvania, we are in a position where there are many new pipelines being planned in order to transport the Marcellus Shale natural gas that is being produced to the markets. You can see here's one of the Commonwealth pipelines that's proposed, but there are many other ones as pipelines. I know new pipelines are being planned, but also other ones are being expanded and in many cases repurposed to provide other uses. I want you to show you for a minute, just for an example, the number of pipelines crossing the Delaware River Basin. And one of the things that you need to be aware of is many times when they expand pipelines or build new ones, they do them in a segmented way, and in that way they tend to avoid some of the same kinds of permitting and environmental impact studies that they might have otherwise been required to do if they look at the entire pipeline. Here is a picture of the natural gas generating plants. I know many of you have been concerned and seen advertisements about coal and understand the implications of coal burning and its impact on climate and air quality. And so many of those coal burning generating plants are being replaced by natural gas generating plants. And again, these will require large amounts of natural gas on a consistent basis, and so many new pipelines are being built to provide adequate supplies for our electricity generation. Further along the way, you will see something called a city gate. So if you're wondering how those large natural gas transmission lines provide the natural gas to you at Cedar Crest or downtown Allentown, that's through a process called a city gate. The city gate is a way in which the pressure is lowered and the larger lines are turned into smaller and smaller lines so that they can go into the distribution lines that you would see servicing places like dormitories or your homes and small businesses. This is a picture of the replacement of some residential distribution lines outside in a neighborhood near my house. I'm sure you're familiar probably with the natural gas disaster in Allentown that was caused by some faulty old gas lines that were cast iron. And as a result of that and other incidents throughout the country, Pennsylvania has some new laws that are allowing customers to pay a fee that allows for the expanded replacement of old natural gas lines to prevent further problems. But you need to know that natural gas lines, as they exist today, do leak. You can see this is a picture of San Francisco, and those lines represent the volume of natural gas being released. In this case, it's methane. Emergency responders need to be aware that pipeline leaks occur. The public needs to understand what to do when a pipeline leaks, what it smells like, what to do. You also need to know that there are public utilities requirements that every pipeline operator provides integrity management plans to the state so that they understand what the status of those pipelines are in our Commonwealth. However, we as the public in Pennsylvania do not have access to those plans, and we would like to see some of that perhaps available to the public. Finally, as members of the public, you need to know what's below before you dig. That's that call 811 number. It's not only for your safety, which in itself is important, but also for your financial well-being. If you hit a fiber optic cable, you pay. It's not cheap. Also, responders need to know what to do when a pipeline ruptures or has a problem. Further, you need to be aware to look, listen, and smell. You need to know that natural gas is very flammable. You need to know what sources of ignition are. So if you go into your home or you're out in the woods and you sense that there's a natural gas problem, don't just use your cell phone and call 911. Get upwind, get far away, get out of the house, then call 911. And again, before that call 11 number, that 811, probably a lot of you think that pipelines are deep. You know, originally when they're buried, they're supposed to be deep, but many of these pipelines have been here for years, and with erosion and flooding, like in these heavy rains that we have today, they're quite near the surface. So just because it says in a book that they're 3 feet below, or 24 inches below, or 18 inches below, they may be much closer to the surface. So it's always safe to call 811. Finally, there's also some things, if you're in the communities and planning for pipelines, there are resources to help you. For example, there's information about planning. You need to understand what it's all about. You need to share it. And also, thanks to some work that's being done in the Commonwealth right now, we have a pipeline notification protocol that's being developed. And that's a method to improve communications between you, as the members of the public, and pipeline operators. Again, it's supposed to establish roles, set the points of contact between local officials and citizens. It has implemented an informational website and defines what they call consultation zones. So that means if pipelines are going through things like water supply areas, high value, exceptional value streams, close to schools, close to hospitals, that these are areas that need to really be talked about. And this is being developed through the Pipeline Safety Coalition. So if you look at pscoalition.org, you will find lots of really good information about how to work together with the pipeline companies to move forward in this area. So I would like to remind you, if you are interested in working on pipelines, consider networking, stay informed, review the resources, there are a lot of them in that handout, and continue to keep learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winters. Our second guest speaker is Karen Ferdin. Karen is the founder of Berks Gas Truth, a grassroots community organization of over 1,000 members opposed to shale gas drilling. Her organization coordinated the effort that led to Pennsylvania Democratic Party's vote to support a statewide moratorium on fracking, the Local Stand campaign that raised funds for Pennsylvanians who lost their water to drilling operations, and Burke County's Act 13 campaign that resulted in 8 municipalities, including the city of Reading, passing resolutions opposing the law's attempt to remove local control over drilling-related operations. Until recently, she chaired the Kutztown Borough Planning Commission and served on the board of Berks County Solid Waste Authority. She serves on the county's Democratic Committee and was a recipient of their Rising Star Award in 2012. We're very pleased to introduce Karen Ferdin. Thank you, Karen.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? And so I wanted to talk to you about a lot of the things that Roberta just spoke with you about, but from the perspective of somebody who lives in a community, is not a professional, and is just trying to figure out with our community members how to deal with the gas industrialization that's going on in Berks County. I didn't think that was going to work. So I wanted to start out with this graphic that harks back to some of the stuff that Roberta was just talking to you about. There was this infographic in State Impact a couple years ago now that shows the difference between old pipeline accidents, if you will, and modern pipeline accidents. There have always been problems on both. However, what we generally think of as the pipeline incident is something that would occur like the tragedy in Allentown on a distribution line, the gas main break. But what they discovered a couple years ago was that transmission lines, those large lines Roberta was telling you about, are now responsible very often for more of the accidents in a year than distribution lines. And that's significant because of the one point that Roberta did make about the fact that there's no mercaptan in those lines. That's the odor that they add to the gas to let you know that something's wrong. And so when you're sitting atop a transmission line and you don't know that something's wrong with it, you're in for a real surprise if you should start to cook out or something. So I wanted to bring that up because Berks County, where I live, is increasingly becoming a gas hub, and facts like that are very concerning to us. We have this idea sometimes that transmission lines or big infrastructure projects exist somewhere else, but they don't. They're running under our properties very often. They're running near our homes, near our schools, more often than we might think. And so if there's a problem on a big line, it's right there, right where we live. And so there's a map of what's happening to Berks County, and not everything is even reflected on this map. but I wanted to point out some of the major projects or things I was going to talk to you about. The big line that goes across that was already on the other map that you saw in Roberta's talk is the Texas Eastern Pipeline. The checkered area in the center is a section that they're building. It's the Burnville Loop. So they're going to be putting new pipeline in next to the existing pipeline that has been there for many years. On one end of the pipeline, on the western side of Berks County, we have the Burnville compressor station, and on the right we have Bechtelsville. Just above the checkered line, you'll see the Berks Hollow natural gas power plant that has also been proposed. And then beneath that, which is not represented here, we have an LNG facility expansion. We've already had a liquefied natural gas plant in Berks County for some time, but they're expanding it. That's not even on here yet. But down on the right, or pardon me, on the left, is the gas compressor, gas conversion facility. It's actually a gas to liquids facility, and I'm going to tell you about that one because it's highly unusual, but what's not pictured on here are the pipelines that would serve it. And so I'll be talking about that a little bit too. There's a 7-mile spur of that Texas Eastern pipeline that would go and deliver the gas to the gas to liquids facility, and then coming off of it, there would be a very short pipeline to connect the facility with the place where they would store the liquefied gas. They'll be turning it into gasoline and propane. And then there would be another pipeline that would deliver that product to market. And so we have quite a bit happening, and I'm going to tell you the timing of it, which I think is significant in a second. But I wanted to point out that, first, that Texas Eastern, if you look at where that pipeline was and how it's connected to just about everything in the county, it's a very significant pipeline for us. It's been around since 1954, so it's not new. The expansion is, making it a higher grade pipeline than it had been, but, it's been around since 1954. I was born in 1956. I used to be a lot cuter. I've deteriorated. Pipelines deteriorate too. And so we have to worry about things like that. I mean, they're not there forever. They really do need to be, tended to. The expansion project, like I said, contains the Burnville Loop, the checkered thing that was on the last map. And that one, I filed a motion to intervene, which is something that you can do when they're proposing interstate pipelines. You can file as an intervener, or you can leave a comment with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But when you file as an intervener, you can actually receive documentation that comes out pertaining to that case. And so I was privy to all of the communications coming from ConocoPhillips, which oddly enough was fighting this pipeline on environmental grounds. Now, they probably had another agenda, but they were saying that there's a northern branch of that pipeline, the one that they want to add to in Berks County, and a southern branch. And their argument was that for the environmental risks involved, you may as well leave it to the southern branch. That is adequate. They lost. Those of us who filed motions to intervene all lost. They approved the pipeline, so now that expansion is occurring. It's going underneath the Schuylkill River. It's going to be horizontally drilled under the river. So we're not really thrilled, unfortunately, with Texas Eastern because we do have a history with it. I mentioned the couple compressor stations that we have. Back in 1987, it was discovered that the one that was on the eastern side of the county, the Bechtelsville compressor station, and the Burnville, they were both involved in this, but it was discovered that the Bechtelsville particularly was an area of contamination by PCBs. They discovered that for 9 years, ending in 1984, the company had been dumping PCBs into pits, 71 pits along the entire pipeline route at 51 different sites. Both of the Berks County sites were involved. But the Bechtelsville one was so bad that in 1987, 3 years after they stopped dumping it, the PCB levels were 200 times EPA standards. 3 years after the fact. So they immediately had to drill some monitoring wells to see if the groundwater had been contaminated, and they had not been able to determine that. They continued to monitor. But what they did discover was contamination on the ground, and that was because that the PCB-laden waste was used to spray the ground to kill weeds. So that's one of our experiences with Texas Eastern. Here's another one, and this is a lot more recent. Fast forward to 2012 when Hurricane Sandy occurred. It was the night of Hurricane Sandy. People were jolted out of their beds by the loudest sound they've ever heard. The people closest to it could smell mercaptan in the air right away as soon as the noise occurred. And some people were afraid of a fireball. They thought the place was going to explode. There were even other people who didn't know they lived near a compressor station, and they found out. So what happened was that evening that a valve had failed to re-engage, and the place was not manned because there was a hurricane happening. And so for some period of time, this thing was just leaking VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and methane into the air. And so the neighbors were very upset. They were trying to find out what happened. They didn't know who to call. That was number one thing that we tried to clear up after the fact was, telling people who you can call. The company doesn't tell them. The DEP, our Department of Environmental Protection, doesn't tell them. And so they didn't know what to do. So they did reach out to the DEP on their own. They figured that out, but they got no response. And they reached out to the company, and the company told them that they had actually sent in their worker who was there to re-engage this valve without any protective gear, no protective garments, no uniform, no mask, nothing, as a way of assuring them that everything was fine, that they had nothing to worry about. And in fact, the newspaper account that eventually came out did say that he grabbed a hard hat and went in. But the air quality in the area was terrible at the time, and there was no protection given. I'll tell you the longer story in a second, but it's important to realize that as I was learning about what was happening that night, I discovered, thanks to a very helpful person at the DEP who I was finally able to contact, there are no upper limits in the permit. So he was able to tell me that what was released in that incident was more than should be released in a year. But it doesn't say that in the permit. It doesn't say that in any X number of hours you can release X number of millions of gallons of something or millions of tons of something. It just says that in a year's time, we expect that this much would be the capacity of this plant to release, this compressor station to release. And so there's two significant things about that. Number one, you never have a permit violation. They've never done anything wrong if what they've done is release all these toxins into the air, because there were no upper limits to violate. But the other significant thing is that he told me that had the numbers released been in line with what would happen in a typical venting, they wouldn't be fined at all. There would be no investigation, really. And he said that the numbers that they had been provided by the company when I first spoke with this fellow were in line. Now, the numbers that they gave me were that 0.41 tons of volatile organic compounds and 3/4 million cubic feet of natural gas were released into the air. So if you're living near a compressor station, if you're downwind of a compressor station, it's really important to realize that it's not the catastrophic event that you have to worry about. Of course, you have to worry about that too, but every time they vent anything to clean out the system, to keep the system functioning, you are being exposed to toxins, just far less than might happen in an accident. It's a very long story. Like I said, I kind of wanted to run you through it because it was such a perfect example of what I called my talk the regulatory maze. People had no idea what they were supposed to be doing, like I said. They had reached out to people they thought to reach out to. The media didn't even respond to them. And so as I started calling on their behalf, I spoke with the fellow who had taken the report that night during the hurricane. And he said that, well, it was a hurricane. They seemed to have the situation under control. He was following protocol. He didn't send anybody out, but he did send the report on to the air quality office in Reading. And so I called that office, and that's where I spoke with the fellow who was so helpful and gave me some information about how the permits work. But he said that they had not investigated and had no plans to because these numbers were in line with the typical venting. So I said, well, the neighbors are very, very upset. And he said, well, if the neighbors are upset, maybe we should investigate. And I said, maybe you should. So they did. Meanwhile, I asked him, are there any safety concerns that people should have having been exposed to all of this? And he said, well, that's really the Department of Transportation. The Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration is the group that deals with pipeline safety. And so it's actually regulated or managed by the Department of Transportation's PIMSA group is what its shorthand name is. So I called them. And we have somebody from that group tonight, but I think I spoke with your colleague Alex. And so when I spoke with Alex, I was describing some of the information I was receiving from the neighbors and about the sound, about the longevity of the mercaptan smell in the air. The woman who was my main contact got sick. So about a week after it happened, she got sick with a respiratory illness. She was sick for about a week, and that's when she called me the second time. We're now 2 weeks in, and they had just stopped smelling mercaptan in the air. That means there was probably some ongoing leak, but nobody was ever able to get an answer to that question. So I contacted Alex and I said, hey, they're smelling this stuff for 2 weeks. And he said, oh, and he said, but it's so much safer to move gas through a pipeline in any other way. And so every time I told him something that made him kind of take pause, he would say, yeah, but it's so much safer. Well, that may be true, but it's not, any comfort to the people in the community who didn't know what was happening and didn't know if they were being exposed to something. And so ultimately, I asked him one time, because he asked me if this was the compressor in Massachusetts I was talking about, and I said, no, this is in Berks County. He ended up telling me he was from Allentown originally. And I said, oh, we're talking about Berks County, right next door. And he said, now, where is this? And I could tell he was looking at a map. And he said, oh, Burnville, that's near my favorite store, Cabela's. So I said, are you a steak man, Alex? And he said, oh, I love steak. And I said, then there's a really good steakhouse in that same shopping center. Maybe you could come out and inspect. And he seriously said that if the neighbors are really upset, if they really can't sleep at night, have them call my boss, and maybe they'll send me out for an inspection. That was the first time that was even broached. And so, you know, it was very disappointing to the neighbors when I went back and I said, well, there is this, you know, option that you can call his supervisor now, and maybe they'll do something. But by this time, they had so little response, they wanted nothing to do with it. So they never came out on their own, and the neighbors really never forced them to. Meanwhile, and during all of this, I got a call back from the DEP. The very helpful fellow in the air quality office was angry when he called me back the second time because he had gotten the new information. The new information was not 0.41 tons of VOCs, it was 61 tons. No point. 61 tons of VOCs, volatile organic compounds, were released into the air in a matter of minutes the night of that hurricane. And it wasn't 750 million cubic feet of natural gas, it was 174 million cubic feet of natural gas. It was a big accident. And so I said, are you going to do something about it? And he goes, oh, yeah. And I said, are you going to stiff fine or something like that? And he said, well, we have to figure out what we're going to do. They have been issued this operating violation, not a permit violation, but an operating violation that they have X number of days to respond to, and then we'll figure it out from there. And so I followed it for months. And finally, almost 9 months after the fact, they fined the company $15,000, which is like lunch money for this company. So it's not the kind of fine that is a disincentive. It's not the kind of thing that's going to make a bad company to behave better. And so we were not in love with Texas Eastern in Berks County. And so we're very upset when the Burnville Loop comes in or when that 7-mile spur is proposed. It's not a company that has a great track record. And so one of the things to come along because of all of that, and I have to say the timing I was mentioning up front that I was going to refer to, is that Hurricane Sandy was really the beginning of this explosion of projects, not even 2 years, in Berks County. So all of a sudden, we are inundated with projects. So when it comes with a bang. And so the Berks Hollow Natural Gas Power Plant, this is the next thing that was proposed. Now, in that case, there was no public hearing and no public meeting. We had heard that the public comment period for the project was going to be ending on a Tuesday. We found out that Friday evening that that was going to be happening the following Tuesday. And so I spent the weekend coercing people into submitting comments, and we asked them all to ask for a public hearing, ask for a public meeting. The difference is that at a public meeting, you get to have an exchange. At a public hearing, they're really just here to listen to you, make your comments. So we wanted both. There's a very helpful Republican state legislator from Northern Berks, Jerry Knowles, who was also receiving calls from his constituents. I had asked people to also call their legislators, they did. And so he wrote a letter to the DEP on their behalf saying, my constituents want a public hearing, public meeting, and he copied me on the letter. And when he got a response, he copied me on that. DEP said, we got 125 comments, but there was so little identifying information that we didn't know if they were even from Berks County, so we put them to the side. And then the next paragraph opens with, we are not granting a public hearing because we didn't get enough comments. So fortunately, I had gathered those comments with the help of my friends at Clean Air Council. They have a system that captures all the information on people who comment. So I said, can I have a spreadsheet that shows just the identifying information? I don't want to know what they said or anything. And so they provided me with that. So I took it to the DEP guy and said, tell me what you can't read. Tell me which one you can't identify. And so they said, well, we can read them. So they didn't give us a public hearing still, but they sent 7 people to meet with me in the morning when they could have sent the same 7 people to talk to the community at night. But still, they came and met with me, and I had a couple of questions for them. I had a lot of questions, but there were 2 that really jumped out for me, because one thing that is required when these companies put in applications to build a power plant like this, they must provide make and model number of the equipment that they plan to use. And that's so that that equipment can be evaluated against something called BACT standards, BACT, Best Available Control Technology. They did not provide any of that information. Instead, they said, oh, we're going to use really good stuff. And they didn't. They didn't really specify. And yet the DEP told me that day that they had every intention of approving that plan. The other thing that I was concerned about was low flow standards. So they're going to be taking lots and lots of water out of Lake Onalani that serves the drinking water needs of really pretty much all of the city of Reading and a lot of the environs. So what happens if there's a drought? What are you going to do then? Can they shut down? Can you shut them down and make them not use up all that water every day? And they said, well, we do have standards, and I knew that they did, but I said, when were they written? Well, they were written almost 25 years ago, before a lot of the developments came to Berks County. So I said, what happens, have you like sort of adjusted your plan over these years between formal reevaluations? And they said, no. So their plan is based on a much smaller population. And so that didn't please me either, because it's not the only project that's going to be taking water from our water resource. This is what they're planning across from a daycare center. This is a natural gas to liquids conversion center. This one is not in the United States, none of them are. If they were to build this one that's proposed for South Heidelberg, I'm in Allentown, I want to say South Whitehall. If they were to build this one in South Heidelberg, Berks County, it would be the first one in the United States. Others have been proposed, so one might actually beat them to it, but it would be the first one. This is what it looks like from an aerial shot. You saw that there was really nothing around the other plant. This one is surrounded by a community, by schools. Here's another view. There was an LNG explosion, liquefied natural gas explosion in Washington State a couple weeks ago. They evacuated a 2-mile perimeter. So the neighbors who were fighting valiantly against this plant said, well, what would it look like if that happened here and we had to evacuate 2 miles? The white box at the bottom is the daycare center right beneath the black box that is across the street, and that's the gas to liquids facility. The white box on the left in the center, that's Conrad Weiser Elementary School. Next up is a Phoebe Nursing Home, and then the 2 boxes toward the right are Wilson School District middle and elementary schools. That's what they'd be evacuating, and homes surround this place. Right now, the good news is that they're actually looking at new sites because there's been such pushback. But a new site is going to be somebody else's community. I wanted to mention quickly the other big piece of this, and that's the Sunoco Manor East Pipeline. There's all sorts of confusion going on about it right now because even the most recent news that wasn't reflected in these slides is that Sunoco has actually withdrawn its application and is going to be talking to the PUC, so maybe you'll get better detail than I have. But what has happened was that Sunoco Mariner East had presumed certain things that they are not granted because they are not federally regulated, nor do they have the status that they believe PUC grants them. They're sort of somewhere in the middle. They don't get eminent domain, which they want. They gone to court and lost over eminent domain on this project. They talked to a man in my county and told them that they had eminent domain and went and surveyed on his land illegally. But they also want the exemption of local control. And that means that your municipal governments would not have any say over what they do, where they cite things. And so this is the little synopsis of that court case that they just lost, but you'll see the sentences say that the judge told them that they don't have public utility corporation status, and so immediately they went to the PUC to get it. PUC responded to us and told us that in fact, they are considering that local exemption, the local control exemption piece of the case, but based on that court case, that they also want eminent domain. So a lot remains to be seen. It's very confusing for us. If it comes here, it might be confusing for you, so feel free to always contact me if you have any questions. And thank you.
Our next speaker is Terry Cooper Smith, a civil engineer, gas safety inspector for the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. In her role, she investigates natural gas pipeline safety incidents, as well as inspects gas pipelines, utilities to ensure adherence to the Pennsylvania and federal codes on gas safety. She's been a lead inspector on several natural gas incidents, including the one which led to the largest fine ever levied by the PAPUC in 2011. Her territory spans most of the Philadelphia region and surrounding counties. Terry has a degree in civil engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology and has been certified by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration in numerous areas of gas safety, including corrosion, liquefied natural gas, incident investigation, to name but a few. Thank you, Terry.
So I'm Paul Mitchell. No, I'm only kidding. He'd love for me to say that. No, I'm Terry Cooper Smith, and thank you for the introduction. And I'm just going to give a general overview of the Public Utility Commission. Paul Metro is our manager and chief of gas safety, and he's located in Harrisburg. And he himself would have been here himself, but I guess he knew we were going to have this like major flood here. I don't know. All right. So as it says, Gas Safety Division is basically responsible for enforcing all the pipeline safety regulations that come down from PHMSA, which was mentioned in the last presentation. And of course, PHMSA is part of the Department of Transportation. PHMSA has, I don't know, how many inspectors do you have across? Let's just say we have a lot more than they do. So basically what happens is we take the federal regulations, which is 49 CFR 192, and we take it in Pennsylvania and we make sure that all the utilities, the gas distribution utilities, gas distribution utilities in the Commonwealth as well as transmission intrastate utilities, which means that they operate within the state of Pennsylvania. None of their transmission lines go across the state. So we deal with both utilities. So let me just go ahead. As you see, the division monitors compliance with the regulations. We also investigate leaks and explosions, although I really prefer not to do those. We do those as well as major outages. And it's really funny that I'm here tonight because the whole way driving up here from the Philadelphia area, my phone was going crazy because a lot of the utilities are having outages right now because of the rain. And you kind of don't really think about that when it comes to gas, but if any of the rainwater gets into any of the pipes, it stops the gas from getting into the system and henceforth stops the gas from getting into your homes. And there's a whole system of going through and going to these drips, and basically drips are like drains in your house, and they open up the drips to get all the water out and get the gas flowing again. So we have a couple of outages right now, but somebody else can handle that while I'm here. So the type of fuels that we inspect, of course, natural gas, propane, and landfill gas. We just basically got jurisdiction over landfill and propane gas in the last 2 years, so we're just really ramping up with those right now, and we've always done natural gas. So there are almost 3 million natural gas customers in Pennsylvania. This is a huge state. But somehow, a good portion of those 3 million are in my territory because I investigate PECO Energy, which is, of course, the 4 counties surrounding Philadelphia. I also investigate PGW, which has all of Philadelphia. And I have a part of UGI in southern Chester County. So we regulate 36 natural gas utilities, the 64 intrastate pipelines. Remember, intrastate means within the state. 4 LNG facilities. Of course, 3 of those 4 are in my territory. I think I do pretty good with the PUC now that I think about it. We have 2 municipal utilities, one of which is PGW, and the other one is Chambersburg. Chambersburg is a little bit, I guess you would say it was southwest of here. And then we have 7 landfill gas facilities. 48,000 miles of gas main. That's a lot of gas mains. And we have customers. We have some utilities only have actually we have a utility has 10 customers. We should change that. 10 customers all the way up to PGW, which has, thousands and thousands of customers. So we run the gamut. You've been hearing in previous presentations about the 811 phone call that you should make. It's also known as the PA1 call. When you dial 811, we want to make sure you dial that before you do any digging. And when I say any digging, I mean any digging. You see a nice little arborvitae tree that you want to buy at Home Depot and put it in your yard. Call 811 first before you actually dig, because you might be digging it right on top of the gas main or your own gas service that's going to your house. So as trivial as it may seem, we don't care. We want you to call 811, even for that little plant. We also investigate BCS complaints. BCS basically stands for Bureau of Consumer Services. So we'll have customers that will call and say, hey, I'm smelling something funny, or my meter outside is kind of shaky. I don't smell any gas, but my meter is kind of shaky, and they'll call directly to the PUC. Also, prior to a few years ago, like right now, a lot of people, how many people get their gas bills electronically rather than by mail? Anybody? One of the things about that is that when you got it by mail, there were all these mail stuffers in there that would tell you a whole lot of information. Some people just tossed it, but some people actually read it. But now that it's electronic, you're basically just looking for how much money do I owe and what lottery do I have to hit to actually pay the utility bill. Well, the thing is that now a lot of people forget that you can call the PUC when you have issues regarding your electric, regarding your gas, your water, unfortunately not your cell phone, but you can call the PUC for any of those type of issues. We also deal with odor complaints, low pressure, dead vegetation. I remember a couple of years ago, I moved into my house, and I remember we were taking stuff out in a moving truck, and I looked across the street at my neighbor's house, and their lawn was beautiful. I mean, absolutely beautiful. But there was this one area in their lawn that was just brown. It looked horrible. And the first thought in my mind, of course, because I'm an inspector, is that they've got a gas leak. And they probably just thought that this was an area, maybe that some people mistake it for, like, maybe there was a tree there, and they cut down the tree, and then it's, brown in that area. But a lot of times, if you see brown vegetation or like dead vegetation and everything else is green, it's possible that you have a gas leak right there. So we do investigate those as well. So this is the kind of thing that I really don't like to see on a daily basis, and I've been involved in several explosions. I was heavily involved in the explosion that happened here in Allentown. The one that happened approximately 2 weeks before that in Philadelphia, and it's really, to me, it's really like a war zone when you go to an explosion. Mentally, for me, it's tough as well because, of course, I'm there to do a job. I'm there to investigate, to make sure that, the responders are doing what is necessary to find out what happened. But at the same time, there's the other half of my mind that says, somebody just lost their entire life. They just lost, they could have lost a relative or whatever the case is. So for me, explosions are, a constant conflict in my mind because I have to remember, but Terry, you're there to investigate. But some of them are really horrible situations, and, you want to get to the bottom of it. People want to find out, who's at fault and the whole bit. But at the end of the day, somebody just lost their life. Somebody just lost everything that they owned. So, investigations like this are tough, and we try to get to the bottom of it so we don't repeat history. So, Moon Township, anybody ever hear of Moon Township? Okay, Moon Township is other side of the state for us. A Comcast crew hit a high-pressure gas main. They did not call 911. Forget about the 811. They didn't call 911. And the federal law now requires that anytime anybody hits a gas main, they have to call 911. And the reason for that is that when you call, the fire department or whatever, they go into immediate evacuation mode. It's amazing. It's like it just turns on immediately. They get there, evacuate everybody. And in Moon Township, that was a serious problem because it was kind of like a botched evacuation and that kind of thing. So now there's a law for that. Let me go on. And that is the picture of it. And it's amazing, a gas explosion, when it happens, a lot of time, all the debris just, goes out. You don't see a lot of fire. A lot of people think that when you have a gas explosion, there's this, like, big, gigantic fire. It doesn't always happen like that because, of course, you have the gas and oxygen mixture that is just right to cause the explosion. So once that gas explosion happens, the oxygen is gone, the fire is out, but most of the debris is like out, really far. Here in Allentown, I remember showing up that night and there was a car wash. Yeah, there was a car wash across the street from the explosion, and like the debris from the car wash was like 2 blocks down the road. It was unbelievable. You would have thought the explosion actually happened in that car wash, but it didn't. It was like down the road. So in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is Bucks County, a water company hit a gas line there 3 times in a half an hour. I won't say much about that. But anyway, so a 250-year-old historic mansion was gone. And, like I said, it's just, one day you're going down the street, you see a building or whatever that you're used to seeing all the time, and then all of a sudden it's gone. It's just gone. But yeah, they got in a little trouble for that one. And the amount of destruction, you see how the debris how all the bricks are just like coming out into the street. And if you look, you hardly see any fire marks at all, any charring or anything like that, because it's just like this poof, this gigantic poof, and it just goes all out. So hardly any fire whatsoever. And Millsburg mismarked gas lines. Now, the whole thing about calling 811, because we haven't told you what happens when you do. When you call 811, there's a group of people that will come out, and you've seen it, every single one of you have seen it, but you didn't know what was going on. You're walking along and you see red paint on the ground, or you see a yellow paint on the ground. And that's because somebody called a locator will come out after an 811 call has been made, and they will mark where everything is. So you'll walk down the street and you'll see these yellow lines, yellows for gas, orange is for cable or Verizon, green is for sewer lines, blue for water. So if you're walking down the street and you see all of that now, you'll know what it's for. And so they come out, but the problem is they're only going on the drawings that they were given by the utilities. So if the utility says, okay, we've got a line, a foot in from the curb, and the marker guy will, take his yellow paint and his yellow spray line, and he'll do 1 foot from the curb, but really, it was actually a ½ inch in. So somebody will say, oh, we're good, we can dig right here, and they dig, and boom, they hit it. So mismarked lines is definitely a problem. It's one of the things that I inspect quite often. I try and make sure that the utilities update and maintain the proper mapping. Because if that map is wrong, when that locator goes out and he marks it wrong, it's just an accident waiting to happen. Fiber optic, let me tell you, Verizon lines cost a fortune. Fiber optic lines, when you hit that little tiny line, it can easily cost up to $1 million to replace. So you don't want to mess with that. So what types of inspections do? I do pipeline construction, any kind of construction that's going on. It could be for a main. The main is just like it sounds, the main gas line that brings gas into the individual lines that go to your homes. So I definitely check on the utilities, make sure that they're installing it properly. Corrosion, one of our biggest problems in the pipeline industry. Make sure that, the lines, they do corrode over time, but there are mitigative actions that should be taking place to make sure that if corrosion is there, that they repair it over a certain period of time, or if they're not able to repair it properly, that they cut it out and replace it. Leak surveys, huge issues. The utilities have have cars that they drive, or trucks that they drive around that have very technological type information that they are able to bring, like it has this bar that goes across, and as they're driving around, they're able to pick up any kind of methane gas. And so we have that kind of leak survey. You'll see people walking around with like a strange looking stick. It's called an FI, and they're walking around and they're trying to pick up any kind of methane. So there's all kinds of leak surveys going on constantly, and actually the PUC, after the Allentown explosion, had the utilities actually ramp up even more of the leak surveys that they do. So you probably don't realize that it's going on around you, but quite a bit of leak surveys are going on every day. Damage prevention, making sure that the utilities talk to excavators and making sure that they know how to do this. Thank you. Making sure that they know how to excavate, and that they hit, that they don't hit the lines, that they actually look at the markings. And then distribution integrity management is a program in which every utility needs to know exactly what's going on with their distribution lines. They need to take in so much data right now about what they're putting in, what they're taking out. So, This is actually a photo that we took in the western part of the state. Now, from Philly, I'm not going to say like I'm a city girl. I'm actually from New York originally, so I'm a New Yorker, displaced to Philadelphia, and they take me on an inspection, and this is the sign I see. And I'm thinking, okay, I am not doing any inspections anywhere near here, because people are serious, no trespassing, they will shoot you. So basically, we look for these type of signs to stay alive. Okay. There are 12 of us across the state. 12 may seem like a lot, but it really isn't. This is a gigantic state, especially when you get up in the northeastern part where the Marcellus Shale is, and a lot of times we are all over the place. Although I have a territory, a lot of times you'll see me out in Pittsburgh and in other parts of the state helping another inspector, and we just kind of all help each other out. And if there's big gas leaks and that type of stuff, and then Marcellus Shale going up in the northeast. So that's who we inspect. I told you landfill, propane gas, and that type of thing. And, okay, that's it. That's us. Thank you very much. I hope I was informative.
Our next guest, Karen Gentile, serves as Community Assistance and Technical Services Manager for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which is part of the DOT, U.S. Department of Transportation. Karen works for the PHMSA office in the Eastern region. In this capacity, Ms. Gentile works to advance public safety, environmental protection, and pipeline reliability by helping to facilitate clear communication among all pipeline stakeholders, including the public, pipeline operators, excavators, and government officials. Prior to joining PHMSA in 2008, Ms. Gentile worked as an engineer and program manager for the U.S. Department of the Army. Karen holds a bachelor's degree from Rutgers College in environmental engineering and a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University in environmental engineering. Thank you, Karen. Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. As Julianne mentioned, I'm Karen Gentile, and I am one of the Community Assistance and Technical Services Managers for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, commonly referred to as PHMSA. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for the invite to come out here today and tell you a little bit about my office, pipelines, and pipeline safety. So my plan here is to provide you with a little overview on energy pipelines, tell you a little bit about my office, who we are and what we do, and how we work with the states to keep pipelines safe. And what I'll do at the end is I'll leave you some resources, so if you're interested in finding more about pipelines and pipeline safety, it'll give you some tools that you can look further into it, as well as my contact information. So, our nation's economy and life as we know it is driven by our access to abundant energy resources. We have natural gas and hazardous liquid transmission lines running throughout the country that are transporting products that we use every day to heat our homes, run our cars, generate power, as well as to manufacture products. And because oil and gas are generated in specific regions of the country, they need to be transported to places where they can be used. And that's why our office, it falls under the Department of Transportation, because we're focused on the safe transport of these energy products. The primary means of transporting oil and natural gas is through pipelines, and 100% of natural gas is transported by pipelines, and approximately 67% of our hazardous liquids, primarily petroleum products, are transported by pipelines. This is just a map to give you a visual image of the transmission pipelines that run throughout the United States. The blue lines represent natural gas pipelines, and the red lines are hazardous liquid pipelines. These don't even include the distribution pipelines and the gathering pipelines. These are strictly the larger transmission pipelines. There are about 2.5 million miles of pipelines in the United States. This is enough pipeline to circle the Earth about 100 times. And there's about a little over 2 million miles of the smaller diameter distribution pipelines. These are typically operating at a lower pressure, they're smaller lines, and these are what you guys know as the lines that are supplying the houses, the businesses. There's over 300,000 miles of onshore and offshore natural gas transmission lines. Those are the lines that were depicted in my previous slide. These are your larger pipelines that are more your longer haul pipelines that are supplying the distribution companies. And then there are about 175,000 miles of onshore and offshore hazardous liquid pipelines. And these are primarily your crude oil pipelines and your hazardous liquid pipelines that are referred to as your petroleum distillates, kerosene, gasoline, jet fuel. And these pipelines are operated by over 3,000 different pipeline operators, both large and small. Pipelines are known as the safest, most reliable, and efficient manner to transport energy products. But there are risks associated with these, and we want to make sure that this transportation is done properly and safely and in compliance with the regulations. We work with the state programs to make sure that the pipeline operators are following the federal regulations and the state regulations so that this can be done in a safe manner. So what is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, commonly referred to as PHMSA? We're a federal agency that falls under the United States Department of Transportation, and our mission is to protect people and the environment from the risks inherent in the transportation of hazardous materials by pipeline and other modes of transportation. We have two different divisions. We have an Office of Hazardous Material Safety, which is concerned and focused on the transportation of hazardous materials above ground via air, rail, sea, highway. And then the office that I work for is the Office of Pipeline Safety. We have 5 regional offices throughout the United States, as well as a headquarters location in Washington, D.C. And we're a really small organization. In my office, we have about 8 inspectors. We actually lost one of our inspectors, so now there's 7 in our office. We're working to backfill that position. We have an accident coordinator located in the Pittsburgh area. And we have a construction manager that oversees new construction projects and monitors those new construction projects so they can be assigned to inspectors for inspecting. And there's 2 community assistance and technical services managers like myself and Alex Dankanich, who work to promote communications and awareness of pipelines. And we also do inspections as well. Some of our roles and responsibilities, we're responsible for the development and implementation of the pipeline safety regulations. You can find the pipeline safety regulations. We have our book that we follow that includes everything that we have jurisdiction to regulate. The regulations are in Title 49, Code of Federal Regulation, Part 192 for natural gas pipelines, and Part 195 for your hazardous liquid pipelines. And what these regulations do is they give us the rules that we can follow for performing comprehensive inspections on pipeline operators. We're basically the safety check. We want to make sure that the products stay in the pipeline and that the pipeline operators are operating in compliance with these federal regulations. And if we do go out on inspections and find that that a pipeline operator is not following the regulations, we can require remedial action, we can assess civil penalties, and we can initiate criminal action if necessary. The states play a major role in regulating the pipeline operations. As Terry mentioned, the states don't have a lot of people. Likewise, we don't have a lot of people. Our office oversees the area from Maine down to Virginia and over to West Virginia and Pennsylvania. So basically the northeast corner of the United States. And we depend a lot upon the state programs to oversee pipelines that we delegate jurisdiction to them to enforce the regulations. All of the states have a pipeline safety program with the exception of Alaska and Hawaii, and in those states, they're covered under the federal inspectors. And as you can see here on the bottom, this just gives you an idea of the oversight that the states have, and they have a big responsibility. They oversee the majority of all the intra-state hazardous liquid pipelines. Those are the pipelines that are within state boundaries. They oversee the majority, 99% of the intra-state gas transmission lines, as well as the majority, if not all, of the gas distribution pipelines, as well as the gas gathering lines that are regulated. And then generally, the feds oversee the interstate hazardous liquid pipelines and the interstate gas pipelines, unless we issue a certificate to them and delegate that responsibility to a state. And that's done on a state-by-state basis. In Pennsylvania, this is just gives you an idea of what the jurisdictions are. Again, it's different for each state, but in Pennsylvania, the federal side, our office, oversees all of the hazardous liquid pipelines, whether it be gathering, interstate, or intrastate, and the natural gas interstate lines. And then Terry's office oversees the intrastate gas transmission lines as well as all the gathering and distribution pipelines. So the pipeline safety regulations, these cover and govern the safety for the safe design, construction, operation, and maintenance of pipeline facilities. We also require pipeline operators to have operation and maintenance plans that spell out their directions on how pipeline operators need to perform certain functions under our regulations so that they're done safely and by using qualified personnel. We require them to have public awareness programs so that people living along pipelines are made aware of things they need to recognize by sight, sound, how to recognize that there's a potential issue with the pipeline so that they can call and notify 911 and/or the pipeline operator. And we also require pipeline operators to have damage prevention programs. I think everybody mentioned, call 811 before you dig. April is Safe Digging Month, so it's my time for a commercial. We do emphasize everybody to call before they dig. Thank you. Everybody to call before they dig so you don't injure yourself or others. And please, let other people know. Make sure your neighbors are calling as well if you see them out there planting trees and things. Just for clarification, there are a lot of pipeline construction projects that are going on in Pennsylvania. Our office doesn't issue permits. Again, our focus is on keeping the product in the pipeline. And so we don't determine either what route that pipeline is taking. What our goal is and our mission is if a pipeline project is approved, we want to make sure that it's constructed, operated, and maintained in compliance with the regulations. Then the next bunch of slides I can flip through very quickly. These are just the National Pipeline Mapping System is a website you can go to find out if there are transmission pipelines near you. Again, they're transmission pipelines. Doesn't include the distribution or the gathering pipelines. And this is the website information for that website. You can go on and view these pipelines at a county level. You don't need a username or a password if you're just viewing it from the public access site. There's also information here on how to obtain the regulations that govern pipelines. The site in the middle is not the official version, but it's an easier to read. You can get it in a Word or PDF file. It's not updated on a daily basis like the Federal Register is, but it might be, easy if you'd like to just print out a version. And then this is our stakeholder communication page. It includes a pipeline glossary, some pipeline basics and information, a good source of research, a good source of information if you'd just like to get some general information on pipelines. And then last but not least is my contact information. If you do have any questions about pipelines, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'd be more than willing to help you. While it might not be something that falls under our jurisdiction, we'll try to help answer your questions and point you to the best people to go to. And thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Our last presenter, Jamal Abodalo, Director of Engineering, Codes, and Public Works for Muhlenberg Township in Berks County, Pennsylvania. He holds a Master of Science degree in Chemical Engineering, specializing in process control and business development. With more than 3 decades working for crude oil and natural gas production companies in charge of design, construction, operation, and maintenance of transmission pipelines, he's developed programs for loss prevention, preventive maintenance, monitor to control and containment of products release. These programs include awareness of catastrophic events, public involvement in preparedness, action plans, and how to handle release of hazardous materials until professional takes over. Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you, Joan. Good evening. I guess the presentations that you've had from all our presenters are, pardon me, are excellent, and I would like to just thank everybody who attended this presentation, as well as the presenters who did a fantastic job of giving you information about what to expect when you operate or when you are living near an operating gas line or an oil line. My presentation is to actually bring to focus some of the difficulties that we all encounter here. And the truth of the matter is that probably one of the earliest things that ever happened to humankind is that the need and the search for energy. And the need basically started with a source of a document that is not confirmed by any of the Old Testament or the New Testament, but it calls for that probably when Eve realized that there was a need for energy, she decided to leave the gate of heavens and find out a way that she can resolve this energy problem. And as a result of that, she took Adam with her because she needed somebody to dig the holes. So on that note, basically what I'm trying to say to you is that mankind, from the beginning, they try to always find a way to move masses of water or energy. And the very first picture of it in there, it just tells you that basically from the beginning we try to move water, we try to move any sources of benefit to us so that we can grow or we can improve into our civilization. As a result of that, the best cities or the largest cities are always, if you look at it from a historical point of view, they are always located near waterways, and that's because at the time there was not anything else to use but the rivers and the ships. With the development of the civilizations and at the turn of the century, when we realized that with the Industrial Revolution that we will be able to take a tea kettle and basically create steam and move some more product in there, that was the development of actually what's called the locomotive energy system there. And as a result of that, in comparison with the engineering search for moving masses of product, there was also the search by the geologists for how can we use more energy and where we would be able to find more products and crude oil, gases, so we would be able to move this product from one place to another. The picture that you're seeing here is actually a true picture in the state of Pennsylvania. Back then, what they did there is that they had drilling wells right next to each other, and actually they drove a shaft all the way to the well where they would be able to draw crude oil out of it. And if you can see down there, the way that they moved product was actually using horses and wagons. That was the answer of it. The problem with finding sources of energy and the cities that they are located, they would use these sources of energy is that they are too far apart from each other. So the engineers and the geologists get together and they said, okay, if we invent a pipe, the pipe basically will be able to move these products from one place to another. The beauty about a pipe is it's safe. And it's actually not only it's safe, but it also moves without any considerations to borders, without any considerations to political affiliations, without any considerations to terrains, because we can move masses and masses of product altogether. As such, when the companies decided to expand their product itself, what happens here is that there is a need of energy, and this need of energy continues to grow. It doesn't really matter what age and what generations you are in, where you will always see a continuation of growth in there. As briefly mentioned, my start with the oil industry was back in the 80s in there, and if somebody says to me at that time that a price of crude oil would go from $13 a barrel to $100 a barrel, we would have all looked at them and said, you must be crazy, you must be dreaming of some different stuff. But that is the truth of the matter, and as long as there is a market demand, there will always be a need for that. So, briefly, how do they go through marketing a route from point A to point B? And believe it or not, the most important part of designing a pipeline is actually the marketing strategy that they have to develop, because a pipeline is just like a train station or a bus. They would like to move it through a certain sections, and through the certain sections they would be able to benefit from tapping off to other sources, so they will be able to capitalize on many other users as they are going from point A to point B. A big important component to that is the right-of-way, and that's where it hits you all together. How to define the right-of-way, and where would you be able to say that, do I have any rights here or I don't have any rights? Right-of-way acquisition actually is something that pretty much, as you can see, as you will see through any development, it's well governed. But more important than it's well governed, actually there are lawyers who are sides on both sides of the table itself, that they can fight and argue this to a very big extent. In fact, in any design of pipeline itself, the legal aspects of any pipeline design is more than the engineering part. And that is the truth of the matter, because what they look for is actually the very first part, the consideration to how many right-of-ways they're going to go through, how many properties they are going to take, and what some of these properties will be able to take into considerations. Again, you heard of something about the eminent domain, and with the eminent domain, basically what happens is that sometimes a government can come up and say to you, I am going to take that part of you, and if you want to fight me on this matter, you will be able to fight in court, or you will be able to take. But basically, in the right-of-way, what you will be able to find out whether you will be able to fight an industrial company, an energy company or not, whether it is natural gas or petroleum. Karen has mentioned to you about the fights that she had with Texas Eastern there, and these fights are actually true. They happen on a daily basis, and most of the time you are going to find out that people basically they give up on this fight, and there is a strategy that the oil industry played. Terry and Karen also mentioned to you that their departments covers a large area with a very small number of people. Okay, imagine that you're covering up all the way from Maine to Virginia and to West Virginia with 8 people. Terry covers the whole entire east region of the state of Pennsylvania and all the way to Pittsburgh with 12 people. Meanwhile, an oil company will be more than happy to throw 10 engineers on this project, 2 attorneys, and as many as needed environmental people to fight this. They have the resources. We, on the other side of the fence, we do not have as many resources as we do. So to play the game and to play it in a smart way is basically what we have. To date, as my calculations show that there are approximately about 8,000 incidents that happened with 521 fatalities. What I'm going to show you next in the next slides in there is that some of these disturbing pictures that you are going to see in there, and basically why are some of these issues are not actually in the media. I cannot unfortunately tap onto the naturalgaswatch.org in there, but if you click on that one, you will be able to see. Maybe I can do the third link. Can I do that? Okay. No, that takes me to the next piece of place. Okay, let's go back to this one here. These links, what will happen in there when you click on these links, you will be able to see a history of incidents that took place from probably 1928 all the way to 2014, and they continue to grow. In fact, one of the links that we have in here, it will show you just the number of events that happened in our area since the beginning of January 2014 until now. So our system at this point is basically aging, because it's been in operation since the early 1900s, and it continues to be used. And basically the best example that I can give you on that one is that imagine yourself that you have a car and you paid off your car and there is no more car payment, and your car is in good condition and you continue to use it. Obviously, whatever you have, say in monthly payment, that will be an additional source of funds that you can use it for something else or you can save it. Oil and gas companies, when they have a pipeline in the ground and the pipeline is paid off in there, they would like to continue to use it, and they would like to give it the minimum maintenance that they can without really adding any more to the operating cost. And as such, Mark McDonald, who is the president of Boston-based natural gas, said that this is an epidemic and it continues to grow at this time. This is a picture of an oil gas spill that took place in November of 2013, and basically what you are seeing there is that an oil spill that actually covered a major residential area. And with this major residential area, the company that was faulted for that was actually Exxon. The impact of it was what I would consider insignificant in there, simply because the fine that was assessed to Exxon was about $2.66 million. $3 million for Exxon is probably a drop in the bucket in there. If you want to look at their Zoom share today, it would give you an exact feeling for how large and how huge is this company. So a $3 million fine is absolutely a joke to them, but they will walk away with something like that. The second slide is actually a more recent slide, and that happened in Pennsylvania. And basically what I'm trying to say to you here is that Chevron, in one of their frac facilities in the Pittsburgh area, sometimes in February, they had a major incident there, and that incident actually killed one individual. And as such, what you have seen there is that they tried to give the residents around that area pizza. So pizza was the answer to the gas explosion that they had. And as you can see there, worst apology ever. Sorry, our fracking well exploded. Here's a free pizza. And that is actually a Twitter that was given at the time. Again, we can go on into more of these gas explosions, and we have plenty of them. I'm going for the sake of time. This is another explosion that happened in New York, and you probably still remember that one. That happened in March, where it took 2 buildings down, 8 people dead as a result of that. 5-story building in Manhattan, in Harlem, in East Harlem. The pipe itself has been in operation since 1910, or 1920, I'm sorry. But in order to really replace the pipeline in Manhattan is about $47 billion. So something like that, you need to take into consideration, saying that who is going to come up with that? And one of our presenters said that they have developed a way that we, as the user of this energy, will be able to pay for that. And obviously, that is not exactly the best way we can have it. This one here, real quickly, if I can click on that bond, it will actually show you an incident that happened in the state of, actually in Philadelphia itself, and it shows the explosion itself. It's a dramatic, so let's skip on that one. This is another slide of a gas rupture in Texas itself, and you will see the magnitude of the fireball. Excuse me. What happened there is that there were no casualties, and the control room that one of the presenters were talking about with the SCADA system managed to close the gas line in there and be able to. So where do we go from there? How can we be able to? You've heard from the PUC, you've heard from FSMA, but what I want to be very blunt about in this matter is that although there are rules and regulations, our staff is actually short-handed in comparison to what the oil company or the gas company can have. They are more staff, they have more financial funds to be able to push through any program. Karen talked to you briefly about an incident where when it was reported the very first time, it was reported about 750,000 cubic feet, if I quote you correctly, and the second time when it was all calculated properly, it was about 61 million ton of methane. They do the calculations, but they try to also change the issues there. So do we need more regulations? In my opinion, I don't think it's a matter of regulations, it's a matter of actually having our staff to be able to follow up with some of this. But at this point, as we have budget shrinkage and as we have less staff, truthfully, it will be very difficult. So the burden comes back onto you. How would you be able to inform yourself? How would you be able to incorporate some of these things, some of the safety measures that you can actually be in charge of and be able to take an active role in this matter in there? These are the integrated management programs that we have, and I'm not going to go through the details of it because my colleagues talked about corrosion and cathodic protections and all these type of things. But what I'm going to say to you is that you really need to find out a way where you can ask the presenters and I'm sorry, not the presenter, ask the oil company or the gas company more information about some of the important operating factors in that, such as do you have a catastrophe prevention plan? Who am I supposed to contact in terms of get in touch with the Pipeline Coalition and find out all the critical component that will make you aware of what happens around you and how you will be able to protect yourself and protect your families in this matter. On a very short notice in there, a gas leak, if it happens during excavation, and most of you will be probably exposed to something like that, the pipe can sever, and the contractor would look at it and say, "Oh, nothing happened. We are all good." Meanwhile, the gas is actually in your the gas leak is in your basement there. The very first time the refrigerator kicks in, or you get a phone call and there is a spark, that would have been the end of the house as you know it, and that's unfortunately what happens most of the time. So the intent here is not to scare you, but the intent here is to make you aware of the fact that really, because our regulating agencies are short in staff, it is our responsibility to take more positive action and to actually participate into knowing about the system and be able to be responsible for how this gas pipeline or how this oil pipeline is going to go in our area. Thank you very much.
Comment on relative safety of a new regional pumping station compared to one that is 40 years old. What is the typical leak rate from a 40-year-old pumping station, and what would it be for a new pumping station?
we don't put a life expectancy on pipeline facilities, which include pump stations. If pipeline facilities are properly operated and maintained, you don't see issues. We've had instances where new pipelines have had problems as opposed to older pipelines. So we expect operators to have operation and maintenance procedures and a process to evaluate pipelines to make sure that there aren't any problems. We run tools such as smart pigs and lines to look for anomalies in pipelines. So age should not be a determining factor on whether or not, there's more issues or less issues. On our website, you can go to, and we actually have any incident information is posted there and publicly available, as well as, those are reportable incidents, which could be leaks that require thresholds for reporting, as well as accidents are available on our website. So you can look that up either by just general history and timelines across the board, or you can look specifically for specific pipeline operators.
One other thing, just to piggyback on that, in terms of, like one of the incidents that my colleague put up about the New York incident that just happened recently in Harlem, that pipeline, it was a cast iron pipe that was 127 years old. When they dug it up, it looked exactly brand new as it did the day it was put in. So age isn't necessarily the best factor. The best factor to look at is the integrity management of that pipe. What are all the records and history of the pipe? Did the pipe have a history of leakage and what have you? So age isn't necessarily the best thing to look at.
I just want to comment on that one very quickly. From an operating point of view, and I did operate facilities that were 60 years old, as opposed to some of them that they are brand new. Basically, what happens, it's not the age, it's actually how the company looks into their policy of preventive maintenance program, and how they will be able to integrate their operating system to make sure that it's always operating in a safe way. That is a culture that the company would have. Some companies would master that very, very well, and they are excellent about it, and no matter how old is their facility, actually it runs in a very good way. Pardon me, but there are other companies that they try to cut corners, and as such, unfortunately, you will see these incidences. Thank you.
I was just going to mention in regards to compressor stations or pumping stations where there are volatile organics or methane being released, the EPA is currently looking at new regulations to be put into place that may require a reduction in what is currently the optimum or levels. So keep an eye on that. I think it's still being discussed, but I think that's an important idea, that regulations are being increased because they realize particularly methane has some very serious impacts in terms of climate.
Sir?
That's the heart of this question. The heart of this question is, under normal standard operating procedures, are there continual leakage from compression systems?
Yes, there are. Some of it's by accident and some of it's by design.
So why don't they have a flare?
Why don't they have what?
Why don't they capture the vapors and flare?
They have, under the new EPA guidelines that they put in, I know the league provided some testimony in that regard, they are putting in regulations that are now feasible by recapturing many of those volatile organics. They are not yet in place yet, but they will be.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to speak to that because I actually work with national coalitions working on some of these issues, and there are regulations like Roberta's talking about going into effect in 2015, but just for well pads, because there's a lot of leaks. The story that came out last week that leaks from well pads in southwestern Pennsylvania can be 100 to 1,000 times EPA standards. And so they're doing what they're calling green completions starting in 2015, but they're not grandfathered. So every one of these wells that's in the ground now is not going to have to do green completions. But what the Energy Department, they're having roundtables right now. We're trying to get people into these roundtables because they're talking about how to deal with the downstream effects of, compressors and pipelines, because at every step along the way, it's either an accident or it's part of the process. LNG facilities release methane. compressor stations release methane. That's part of how they operate. And so how are they going to capture that? And they haven't really dealt with that yet. They're starting to, but they haven't done it yet.
They also can do things like install low bleed valves. There are lots of things they could do, but for those people in the audience who may not realize that methane is 20 times more effective or higher at holding heat and trapping the heat within our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So that's why the EPA right now has their eye on methane and is trying to put into place regulations. How effective they will be remains to be seen.
I just want to address one thing about these, the VOC emission. The VOC emission is controlled by air permit, okay? And one of the things that I would like to say to you, and this is this is an aspect that I did not really elaborate on, but let's do the math real quickly. Let's say that the VOC emission is you are allowed per day to discharge, say, 1 cubic foot of material, of methane, times 365 days, so your total permit is going to be 365 cubic foot. Okay, that is your permit. The way they play the game is actually, they will show that they are under the radar all this time, and for one single event, they had a release, and that release, it so happened to be 500 cubic foot, slightly above the permissible rate. Okay, and then the calculations will go back and they will retract, and then they would find out that it was 365,000 cubic foot. So what happens here is that, and it's very important to realize this, agencies, governing agencies, they do have regulations in place, and they would allow for a certain emission, because technically speaking, it's impractical to say that there will not be any emission. There will be, and they will give them the most strict criteria to go by. However, they would take the maximum level, and they would take the average daily level, and they will play with the numbers just exactly the same way they do with anything else in order to show that they are not in violations. And that is a game that's played very, very often, by the way.
This question is directed to Terry Cooper Smith of the PUC. What was different in Allentown that caused there to be a large ongoing fire after the natural gas explosion versus other explosions with little fire damage?
As I recall, in Allentown, you had a row of houses on that, I'm trying to remember the name of the street now, and when the main house that had the largest amount of gas that it exploded, you had several other houses where you had other things that could ignite. And it took quite a bit of time for the for the fire department to really get organized to start taking those fires out, because if you recall, that night, oh my goodness, it was like 2 or 3 degrees outside. It was tons of ice that was out there. You had fire hydrants that were totally encased in ice. So while they're trying to get set up to, put out one fire, you had other areas there that were, there were other materials in those houses that just caused more fire. So it took, it was like a rolling reaction. That was a very chaotic scene. Now that I look back at it, it was a very chaotic scene. Typically, like I had said before, you usually have this, this puff, and then, that's it. But you had tons of it, of other materials in the houses that, went up on fire. You had a lot of furniture and what have you that was on fire. That was really a very difficult scene to control, and it took quite a while to get it under control.
Excuse me, what plans are there for updating old lines throughout the state? This is to anyone who
Yes. Okay, so I'll speak from a distribution aspect. There is a cast iron replacement program that is going on right now where each utility that runs distribution has turned in a plan to the Public Utility Commission as to how long it will take them to replace their cast iron. Now, as great as that sounds, some of the timelines are quite long. For PGW, which probably has the most cast iron in a concentrated area, it could be 40 or 50 years. Of course, PGW has been in the news quite a bit right now because they are in the midst of a sale. A company in Connecticut an investment company in Connecticut has won the bid to purchase PGW, and right now, it's still kind of up in the air because the city of Philadelphia has to approve the purchase. And I say all that to say that it's the PUC's intent that when they actually purchase PGW, that they will either, take on that same cast iron replacement plan, or if possible, accelerate it so it's even less. But each company has put in a cast iron replacement program, and it's ongoing. If you're, driving around and you're seeing a lot of construction, most of it is cast iron replacement, is what the answer. To replace, cast iron has always been at the top of the list in terms of, having the most corrosive material, and it would probably be within the best interest of the state if most of the cast iron, if not all of it, were gone. What's being replaced now, it's being replaced with plastic, high-density plastic, and so corrosion is not necessarily going to be an issue on plastic. Now where there are some areas where we have cast iron going to plastic, you might have an area there, but in general, over the years, you will see more and more plastic going in and more cast iron coming out.
We don't have a specific replacement program for transmission lines. As we discussed before, there's not a prescribed life on a transmission line. Our regulations require that pipeline operators properly operate and maintain those and monitor those, and part of that program is to have integrity programs where they go through and assess the high-risk areas, known soil conditions that might cause problems on pipelines or specific pipeline manufactured in a certain era. So we depend on pipeline operators to have these integrity management programs, so it's an ongoing process to properly maintain them and replace them if necessary.
And one more thing on the transmission, so transmission lines, they have an integrity management program, and now the distribution companies have a distribution integrity management program called DIMP. And DIMP actually takes all of those cast iron pipes and assesses a risk number, and the ones with the higher risk are the ones that are mitigated first, and then they keep coming down.
Can I respond one more time to the problem with the emissions from compressor stations? I think one of the things the League found out when we did our initial studies, in many of the counties where these compressor stations are now being placed and where many of the well pads are, there were no monitoring air quality facilities. So that a lot of these places, there are no air quality monitoring going on, so we're not always sure what is being released, other than by going by what the company records say.
Here's a question. Are the characteristics of Marcellus shale gas any different than the natural gas that was formerly delivered to the customers of the Northeast? Part one, and part two, who regulates what might be in the Marcellus shale gas, for example, radon?
There are two types of natural gas that is in the Marcellus shale that's currently being extracted. In the western part of the state, it's called wet gas, and that has other substances in it that they can further, say, process into things like ethane, propane, butane. And the natural gas in the eastern part of the state, like in Susquehanna and Bradford County, is of the type that can be basically dry gas, and it's basically put almost as is into the transmission lines and into the facilities and systems. As far as monitoring for radon and other things like that, that's a topic that is still being discussed as far as I know. I think we'd like to see more monitoring. Karen?
Yeah, I mean, we regularly meet with the DEP. There are about 6 of us who meet with the head of oil and gas operations for the DEP. We talk largely about water contamination, but it's a great concern for people because there are regulations on the books, there should be more, but, this all comes down to, all of these issues come down to how well they're enforced. And so, I can give you an example. When somebody has a water contamination problem, they're going to be handed a report that they don't necessarily understand. It talks about MCLs, maximum contaminant levels, and they don't know necessarily how to interpret this, but they're also led to believe that this is the report on whatever was in their water, and that may have come by way of a leak in a well pad, in a casing or something. So we're still talking about the same stuff. So whatever's in there, they look at the report, they see, I have too much whatever, barium or something, but what they don't realize is that many of the chemicals that are involved in gas drilling or things that might occur from coming out of a well, out of the shale directly, don't have MCLs. They've never been calculated. And so people are giving, the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, is giving people very poor information very often, and they're probably text to, stretched too thin too, but they're not really providing the public with information that they need to understand what's happening to their property or what's happening to their water. So that's just typical. We do this every day.
I guess I'll just mention, our agency, PHMSA, doesn't get involved we don't have jurisdiction over the production side of pipelines. We're strictly the safe transport. So we want to keep that product in the pipeline from point A to point B, and those are what our regulations are focused on. I do know that the quality of gas is regulated by, for example, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they have certain standards that they have to meet, as well as the companies that they're delivering the gas has to meet certain content standards for a user product. But again, we're strictly the safe transport of that. I know there has been a lot of discussion about venting of gas. In some cases, our regulations, again, we don't get into the emission side. We're keeping the product in the pipeline, but we do have safety systems that are part of the pipeline facilities that are safety releases. So if pressures are exceeded, for example, or there are situations where something isn't working properly, the facilities such as compressor stations vent that gas. It does an emergency shutdown and it vents that gas to atmosphere, and that's to prevent the further problems of, having an overpressurized system. So.
I was about to say ditto for the PUC. We don't actually get involved with Marcellus Shale until after it gets into our distribution line.
Correct, but I was just wondering if in the information that you would come across, are the private companies taking regular depreciation on all of the things that you possibly get, and then not putting that money back into refurbishing things, including pipelines and things?
May I just restate the question? Joan has asked if the pipeline companies depreciate the value of their pipelines and so forth over time, and in fact, are they using that money to reinvest into improving those pipelines? And Jamal had some comment.
I guess the pipeline companies, as well as the oil-producing companies and the gas companies, they are actually in for a profit. That's basically their main driving force. They are there to profit from their operations on a daily basis and to capitalize on this investment as much as they can. So wherever possible, that they be able to utilize means and mechanisms of which they can benefit more financially, they will do so. Okay, I'll give you a very simple example. In the mid '80s, when I started my career working for an oil company in the Middle East, the price of oil, for some of you, they probably didn't know that, it was at $37 a barrel and plummeted to $13 a barrel, okay? That was the shock that sent waves through the whole entire oil industry. The instructions to us from executive orders in there, at $13 a barrel, we will make a profit. Okay? We were making a profit at $37 a barrel. Now we are going to go to $13 a barrel so that we can stay competitive, and we are going to sell in the black market, but we are going to still to be profitable at that operation. And we did find mechanisms and ways to basically produce at less than $10 a barrel. The price of oil right now is about $110 a barrel, or somewhere around 104 Brent, but basically the production of oil, any oil barrel in there is not any more than $25 a barrel. Okay, and that is basically the profit margin that they take. Okay, the truth of the matter, and this is what happens, they have lobbies, and the lobbies that the way they operate, they will go to our elected politicians and they will say, we really would like to update, we really would like to integrate the system, we really would like to replace these pipes, but we cannot do it all on our own. We really need the customer to share with us that burden there. And as such, the PUC and other organizations will come up and say, we will allow a 10% surcharge or a 5% surcharge for the duration of such and such project. And that is how they will be able to continue to capitalize on them. They are, the oil industry, as well as the pipeline transportation companies and natural gas companies, they are in for the profit. That's what they are in for.
When we go in and inspect pipeline operators, we're looking at their documentation, their operation and maintenance, documentation, manuals, procedures, records that they've done their required inspections, surveys. We don't get into the financials at all with pipeline operators. We're strictly, looking at them from following the regulations. So I don't have any background on that.
I would say that's the same thing for gas safety. We're looking at the exact same thing as PHMSA does, but there's the other part of the PUC that actually does get into the whole financial aspect of what utility is doing. I do know that like the water companies have filed something called a DISC, which is a certain amount that they can charge per customer for for getting funds for doing the infrastructure. I don't know what the water company is up here. I know in the Philadelphia area it's Aqua, and they've had this DISC, and I know that the gas utilities, some of them are filing for a DISC also for the cast iron replacement.
I would like to repeat basically what Beverly said. She says, in looking at all these issues, we realize how complex the matters are, just in terms of safety, when you expand that to looking at government regulations and lobbying and, extraction processes and environmental issues and explosions and the future, it looks very bleak. And with the future in mind, and we have young students here and others, what do we do to engage people in this conversation and get them to perhaps have a voice in these processes? And I think one of the things the League of Women Voters has done in response to that is to provide study guides, to look at it at a statewide level, to have people at the grassroots throughout the Commonwealth look at these issues, to develop positions, to advocate, and to educate. And so we're here to educate and to spread the word, and hopefully if everyone goes and tells a friend what they've learned tonight, or contacts a local elected official and say, these lobbyists may not have the best interests of the public in mind, that I'm concerned about what I heard, can you give me more information, where can I go? We've given you resources, there's a whole list of things on that handout in your folder about different agencies. If you're interested in siting, or if you're concerned about environmental issues, there are places to go, there are people to contact, and I would begin with the Pipeline Safety Trust. That's the best place to begin. We have the Pipeline Safety Coalition right here in Pennsylvania that has good information. The League of Women Voters has a lot of information on their website. Karen's organization, PHMSA wants us to know more. PUC has a lot of information on their website. It is overwhelming. It can be overwhelming, but start someplace. That's all I can say, is start someplace. And even if you just go around and tell people to call before they did, that's a big place to start. but I think we do need desperately more people who are inspectors at all levels so that we can monitor and enforce the regulations that we have in place. Even though the regulations aren't the best, they're a place to start.
I could talk about this all night, but I won't. But I do have to say a couple of things. First of all, April is the first month we crossed 400 parts per billion in the atmosphere of carbon dioxide, and methane is directly connected to all of that because it burns as carbon dioxide. It's not clean, it's cleaner by about half. But when methane, these leaks we're talking about, make it straight up into the atmosphere, we're only talking about, Roberta was correct that the EPA puts it at about 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide, but the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, recently put it in a 20-year time scale, which is all we have, to avoid raising the temperature of the planet by 2 degrees. We've already raised it 1. We can't afford to cross this point of no return as 2 degrees. Point being that they recently upped the estimate of how potent methane is. It's now 86 times in that 20 years that we have to deal with. And so it's very, very much more potent. It's not put into the atmosphere at the same volume as carbon dioxide, and it doesn't stay there as long, but when it leaves, it doesn't really leave, it converts. It meets up with hydroxides in the atmosphere and becomes carbon dioxide, so it's a trifecta. It's not the time to be, in my view, and this is my view, relying even more on methane. We should be actually transitioning to off of fossil fuels to renewable energy. But my point in saying all of this is that this is what you're inheriting. This is the world you are inheriting. The storms like we have today, I can't say this is due to climate change, but we've seen so much more extreme weather ever since we've seen climate change upon us happening more quickly than we had anticipated. And so this is what you can expect for your futures. You need to get involved. But what concerns me, to your point, is that we don't have time to be citizens anymore. You know, people who have full-time jobs and kids to take care of and parents to take care of and maybe multiple jobs just to survive don't have a chance to be a citizen anymore. We have to take that back and just make the time somehow. And the other thing that I would say is that we really need to disabuse ourselves of this notion that we like to say, corporations rule the world. But I have seen firsthand, we have a moratorium on drilling in the South Newark Basin that was put into effect by a Republican who supports Corbett's love of the natural gas industry, and it was because he went to public meetings and the room was full of people who would not vote for him anymore. So politicians care about two things. They care about the number of dollars that they get, but they care about the number of votes. So never think that corporations rule the day, because if you stand up and show up, you can change a lot of things.
Say to the students who are here, I hope that, by listening to a lot of stuff we talked about was technical and what have you, but I always want to make sure before I leave, after I've spoken, that you guys have gotten something that you can take away with. If nothing else, 811 is crucial. The second thing is, if you're walking around, I don't care if it's here on campus, I don't care if it's in Allentown or wherever you live, if you smell something that just doesn't smell right, so maybe it smells like rotten eggs or something, the first thing I want you to do is get out of wherever you're at and take whoever's in that house with you or in that facility, take them with you. Get someplace where the smell is much better and then make a phone call. I do some of these talks in all different places. I've talked to kids in middle school, I've talked to, students in college and what have you, and I'm like, well, when I left, do they have any idea what to do? I mean, we're talking about, going to talk to your politicians, getting involved and what have you. And so there's that level of it. But then there's the basic level, which is to keep you safe. The basic level of keeping you safe. 811, and when you smell something, move to someplace safer and make a phone call.
Yep, and I just like what Terry mentioned, bottom line, we want you to be safe. We require pipeline operators to have public awareness programs to educate stakeholders, excavators, public officials, emergency responders, and the public living in the vicinity of the pipeline and working in the vicinity of the pipeline to recognize the sights, sounds, issues of how to identify a potential issue to get out and to call 911 from a safe area. It's discouraging how little people really know about pipelines. I speak like Terry to different audiences. I ask how many people have heard of 811. Nobody's heard of our agency. But, we're trying to put the information out there. We have a ton of information on our website to try to educate people. There are pipeline operators that are trying to sponsor events. They're painting 811 along the sides of tanks along the road sign. I think in the Kentucky Derby, there's one of the jockeys is sponsoring 811 to try to get the message out. There's NASCAR advertisements. We're trying to get the safety message out. Unfortunately, we don't know, what makes people pay attention to the message, and it's different, unfortunately, for everybody. People want to get the messages in the mail. Some people want them electronically. Some people don't want them at all. So we want to get the messages out. If we can reach one person, it's helpful. We take the opportunity. PHMSA has the community assistance and technical services people to try to go to forums like this to talk to the public and get the message out. We sponsor the PHMSA technical assistance grants because we are a small organization. We need the help of the communities to get the word out, and we need the public to be the eyes and the ears to see if they see something, call us, let us know, so we can get involved.
And I just would like to place a 2-minute ad for the League of Women Voters, because you've heard the importance of voting. We hope you have registered to vote. If you cannot vote, you still have time to put in absentee ballots, and you can still do that before the election. But if you've not yet registered to vote in Pennsylvania, you've missed the deadline. So make sure you're registered to vote by November. The League has been around for over 90 years. We were formed because, believe it or not, young ladies, when we as women fought and won the right to vote, people did not believe we were smart enough to vote, nor had enough information. So our role has been to educate and remind people and give them nonpartisan information about the voting and governing processes, and also to educate everyone about some of the significant issues. We believe this is a significant issue worth you knowing about as you go to the polls.
Thank you, Dr. Winters. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming, and please hand in your questionnaire